It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us today to talk about a children's book that not only has a great message, but also just really great illustrations. It's called The Seed Who Was Afraid to Be Planted, and joining us is the author, Anthony DeStefano. Thanks for being here, Anthony.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Did you have a favorite book when you were a kid?
I think it was My Best Friends Are Dinosaurs. I don't know. That was the first book I ever read.
I don't know that one. Is there...
No, it's out of print many, many years.
Okay.
But it was a rhyming book, so it must have influenced me because I've written about 8 or 9 children's books, and about half of them are rhyming books. So it must have had an effect on me.
Well, the rhyming books always get extra points for me. That's Dr. Seuss.
Yes.
Great format.
Yeah, they're very satisfying. The mind, the human brain. It's interesting to think about why people like rhymes and poetry, but it's that going back, that we're going in a circle. Somehow that completion makes you feel satisfied.
So did that book, My Dinosaurs Are My Friends, or what was it?
It was a rhyming book.
But was there a moral to the story? Was there something that you learned from it?
Absolutely no moral. It just was a kid's book, and that was the first thing I remember. You asked me what was the first book, and that's what it was. It wasn't anything significant.
So what made you want to write books for children?
I've never wanted to write just books for children. I've always wanted to write books for children that would also have meaning for adults, because I've always been aware of the fact that children don't just read these books on their own, but their parents read them to them, the grandparents, the uncles, the aunts. I thought it was just a great way to evangelize everyone, the whole family, if you've got a book that's simple enough and entertaining enough for a child to understand, but at the same time has different layers of meaning that then can also even challenge the adults who are reading, and where the adult reading and say, hey, wow, I didn't think of it that way. So it's sort of like a slick and tricky way to evangelize adults, too.
Yeah, I think the same thing, books, movies, anything, if you can get both children and adults to get something out of it and enjoy it, you've hit the jackpot there. And this book does that. What inspired The Seed Who Was Afraid to Be Planted?
Well, 2 things. Number one, I've always thought that Jesus told several parables about seeds. The grain of wheat that falls to the ground and has to die, and then in order for it to grow and bear fruit, and then the mustard seed that grows into the biggest tree. And I always thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to write a book about one of these parables of the seed, told from the perspective of the seed? Because a seed, if a seed could talk and it had to fall to the ground and die before it became something wonderful, well, that seed presumably would be frightened and scared. So I thought it would be a great book to write for children and address this subject of fear. And that's the second reason I wrote it, because I think that adults and children, the biggest problem that we all have is fear. We're so afraid of everything, money problems, job problems, family problems, our children. Most of all, we're afraid that we just don't have what it takes to overcome all the problems we face. And I think the problems that we have as adults, these problems of fear, they start when we're children. So I always wanted to write a book about fear, and I thought that the parable of the seed was the best way to do that.
Yeah, and to make that connection, because, this isn't, I guess maybe a derivative of those 2 parables a little bit, but really it's got its own story. This isn't like a duplication of something that Jesus said. It's got its own kind of twist.
It doesn't mention Jesus in it, actually. It's just about a seed who is very happy where he is in his little drawer, in his little comfort zone, but he's afraid that he's going to be planted one day. And sure enough, he is. The gardener who owns the house where he lives takes him out and plants him in the ground, and he's very afraid of that. But sure enough, what happens, and not to give a spoiler alert, but the seed does, despite his fear, he sprouts up and sees that he's destined to become a tree. A beautiful tree overlooking the shore, and a tree where birds fly and animals play, and a tree that nourishes the surroundings. So he has a wonderful destiny, even though it starts out with a lot of fear.
So what are some of the things that you think children are afraid of, and how do you hope that this book helps them with that?
I think children are afraid of so many things. I mean, it's not, things that are commonplace to adults, children are afraid of. The first day of school, the moving into a new neighborhood, going to the doctor's office, going to the dentist's office. They get afraid when scary things happen, like their pet dies, or my goodness, when a grandparent dies or something. The world is a scary place, and if you're small to begin with, and all these experiences are new, then that's even scarier. The idea of this book is to show them that if they put their trust in God, this is the great lesson of the book. If you trust in God, then no matter what happens, God is going to somehow get you through it. He's not going to necessarily take away the thing that you're afraid of, but he's going to get you through it, and he's going to somehow pull good out of that. And this is the great lesson for adults and children. And if they could get that instilled in them early, that they could to trust in God and surrender to what God wants, well, boy, that will protect them throughout their entire lives.
We're talking with Anthony DeStefano, and the book is The Seed Who Was Afraid to Be Planted. And you mentioned in there grief, which are like, a pet dying or a grandparent dying.
Yes.
How do you see that fitting in? Because the seed isn't necessarily grieving something, but that is also a theme in the book.
The seed is planted in the ground. In fact, there's one scene in the book that the illustrator captures beautifully. It actually looks like it's like a grave in a way. I'm not trying to scare children, but it has that aura of something that is dying. And I think that a child won't relate to dying, but if he has a pet who dies, or a grandparent or someone in his family dies, then who's ever reading this book to the child can say, well, what happened to this seed is what's happening to grandpa, or what's happening to someone else who's died. They didn't really die. They're just becoming something even greater in heaven, because of what at the end of the book is very much like heaven. What happens to this tree? He overlooks the shore with millions of mansions overlooking the shore. It's very much meant to be like heaven. So it's an opportunity for who's ever reading the book to the child to talk about heaven and the fact that death is not the end of the story, that life is the end of the story.
You mentioned really trying to reach both audiences, children and adults. How do you think adults might view this story differently, or might have different fears or different understanding of fear than children? Or is it similar?
I think we just have different things we're afraid of. We're afraid of the fact that are we going to be able to make our mortgage payment, or what am I going to do about my child who looks like he's going in a bad direction, or am I going to be able to figure out how to deal with all of this, or being afraid about my medical test that I just got, So we're all afraid of everything all the time, and as I said, we're mostly afraid that we're just weak and not going to be able to deal with these fears. So the same message that children get from the book, which is that, look, we plug into the power source of the universe, which is God. Trust in God that He's going to get me through this and somehow pull good out of bad, just like He somehow pulled good out of a crucifixion and pulled out the greatest good, resurrection. He's going to be able to pull out something good out of the problems that I go through. So that message, I think, is universal, and I think an adult will get that message even more powerfully from this book than a child, because he'll be able to see maybe possibly all the different little things in the book that are symbolic.
What are some of the other topics and themes that you've covered in other children's books that you've written?
I've done a book called The Donkey That No One Could Ride, which is, I think, my most popular book. It's about faith, and it's an Easter story. I've written a Christmas story called Little Star, which has been, all these books have been on EWTN, for instance, and have been on TV, read by different celebrities and such. And that book is about love, self-giving love. I wrote a book called The Puppy That No One Wanted, and that's all about where our true home is with God. All these books have little themes that I think could help children, hopefully, and adults. But this is the book I'm most excited about now, because I think even though, I think it's the best children's book I've ever written. I think it addresses the subject that's most important, which is, in spite of all the fears we face and the griefs we face, that trust in God is the key to all of it, the key to everything.
Yeah, I think it's a great book. I've enjoyed reading through it and look forward to reading it with my children. Actually, Andrea took the book home, and her daughter won't let her bring it back to the radio station. So you've got the endorsement of a little kid here as well. Also, I feel like it's very different than The Giving Tree, but that was one of my favorites as a kid. And I feel like there's a little bit of an overlap of this maybe being like a prequel, but kind of leading into this Giving Tree as well. So there's a little bit of similarity there, maybe.
There's a lot of different little things that, it could be compared to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden too. I mean, I put a lot of things in here that for older children or adults could maybe find references or symbols that they could discuss amongst each other. The gardener stands for God, and the flowers and the fruit, they stand for fruitfulness, and the animals and even the two little children in the book could be Adam and Eve. I mean, there's many things that you could talk about that I've put here.
And in the back, you have some scripture verses as well that go along with the whole gardening and seed and tree themes as well. So people should definitely check this out.
That's right.
Where is the best place to get the book?
I think you could get it anywhere at Catholic, Christian bookstores all over. You can get it on Amazon.com naturally. Barnes & Noble is carrying the book as well. So you can pretty much get it anywhere.
All right. Again, the book is called The Seed Who is Afraid to be Planted. And Anthony DeStefano is the author who has joined us today. Thank you for sharing this with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.